All right, welcome back, focused learners, to the ultimate document-based question exam review. Today, we are unpacking one of the absolute most fiercely debated figures in 18th century global history. So get your notebooks ready, because in this explainer, we're critically evaluating the wildly complex reign of Tipu Sultan, famously known as the Tiger of Mysore. You know, history is rarely just black and white, and by looking closely at these historical records together, we aren't just reviewing for an exam, we're actually practicing how to spot bias in literally any information we consume.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Every great historical review needs a solid central thesis prompt, and well, here's ours for today. Was Tipu Sultan a modernizing hero who valiantly fought off European colonial expansion, or was he an intolerant tyrant who brutally oppressed his own subjects? As historians, we can't just take one side's word for it. We have to really look at the data together.
Here is our quick study syllabus for this session. 1. A dual legacy. 2. The modernizing administrator. 3. Military and diplomatic strategies. 4. Evaluating religious policy. And finally, 5. Unpacking colonial historiography. All right, Section 1. A dual legacy.
So, Tipu Sultan ruled during a period of just massive upheaval, right at the onset of total British colonial domination in India. And because of this, depending on which historical documents you read, you get two wildly different versions of the man. To some, he's a heroic innovator, a freedom fighter who pioneered military technology and built Mysore into an absolute economic powerhouse. But to others, the records point to an intolerant tyrant, highlighting accounts of brutal massacres, forced conversions, and scorched earth tactics against local populations. Our job today is to impartially analyze the objective evidence behind both of these viewpoints.
Moving on to Section 2, the modernizing administrator. Let's crack open our first bucket of historical evidence, looking at his strategies for 18th century governance. Definitely make sure to take notes on these specific economic policies, because they completely transformed Mysore. Tipu Sultan didn't just fight wars. He was highly focused on internal economic development. He literally sent an emissary all the way to Bengal just to study silk cultivation, initiating Mysore's incredibly lucrative polyvoltine silk industry, meaning they could harvest silk multiple times a year. He laid the foundation for the massive Kanambati Dam on the Kaveri River, built extensive road networks connecting major cities, and even patronized the local arts, giving prominence to the famous Channapatna woodwork toys that are amazingly still celebrated today. So, what was the actual result of all these aggressive economic strategies? 5. Under Tipu's rule, Mysore's average income skyrocketed to an astonishing 5 times higher than the basic living standards of the time. I mean, his kingdom actually overtook Bengal as India's dominant economic power. Pretty incredible, right? But look, to protect all that new wealth, he needed a totally different type of military. Here is the step-by-step breakdown of how he reorganized his forces. First, he disbanded the traditional local agricultural militias, known as the Kandashar. Instead, he enrolled full-time, highly disciplined soldiers, including Rajputs, Muslims, and tribal men, creating a dedicated standing army. To fund all this, he imposed higher taxes on landowners. Now, what's genuinely surprising here is that this indirectly weakened the local slavery system. Landowners whose slaves were recruited into the army suddenly had to pay higher taxes while simultaneously losing their free agricultural labor. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is his approach to governance. He enforced a very strict moral code, officially prohibiting liquor, prostitution, and even the use and agriculture of cannabis. But his judicial appointments show a fascinating dual community system. He appointed Muslim Qadi, or Islamic law judges, right alongside Hindu Pandits, or Hindu law judges, in each province. On top of that, he completely revamped the state's identity by introducing a new solar-based Mauludi calendar and a highly complex, brilliantly designed new coinage system. Which brings us to Section 3, Military and Diplomatic Strategies. So, how exactly did Tipu Sultan protect this fast modernizing state from the encroaching British East India Company? 5,000. That is the number of specialized rocketeers he deployed at a single time in his army brigades, known as kushuns. He took the existing rocket technology his father, Hyder Ali, had utilized and scaled it up into a massive, organized artillery division. The specific leap in military logistics here is absolutely crucial for your notes. Tipu's Mysorean rockets featured iron tubes for holding the propellant. Now, that might sound simple to us today, but back then, it was revolutionary. It allowed for much higher thrust, a significantly longer burn time, and a terrifying range of up to 2 kilometers. During the Anglo-Mysore Wars, particularly at the Battle of Pulalur,
These iron-cased rockets fired en masse wreaked absolute havoc on the British forces. In fact, after eventually defeating Tipu, the British actually captured these rockets and reverse-engineered them for their own use in the Napoleonic Wars. Talk about taking aggressive notes.
And he didn't stop at land warfare. The sheer scale of his naval undertaking was massive. In 1786, Tipu decided to build a fleet, investing heavily in naval shipyards at Jamalabad and Majidabad, commissioning 20 battleships and 20 frigates. He even took advice from French Admiral Suffren to use copper-bottomed hulls, drastically increasing the longevity and the speed of his ships. He also knew, realistically, he couldn't fight the British alone. So he cast this massive global diplomatic net. Tracing this timeline, we see emissaries arriving all the way from Qing China for the silk trade. In 1787, a full embassy went to the Ottoman Sultan in Constantinople seeking military aid. In 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte himself wrote a secret letter to Tipu from Egypt, hoping to join forces to drive the English out of India. He even corresponded with the Afghan ruler Zaman Shah. He was basically playing three-dimensional geopolitical chess to counter British influence. All right, Section 4, Evaluating Religious Policy Evidence. Now, this is where the historical debate gets seriously hot, and it's the ultimate test of our DBQ skills. As impartial examiners, we have to look really closely at two completely contrasting sets of historical administrative records. Exhibit A points to religious tolerance and patronage, while Exhibit B points to severe religious persecution. Let's weigh the raw data for both. In Exhibit A, the administrative records show that Tipu made regular, documented endowments to at least 156 Hindu temples. When the Maratha army raided and damaged the holy Sringashankaracharya Matha, Tipu wrote 30 letters expressing his deep grief. He sent financial aid to rebuild it, stating explicitly that those who sin against a holy place will suffer the consequences. He also appointed numerous Hindu ministers to top positions, including his treasurer, Krishna Rao, and his highly important minister, Pornaya. But then we have to flip the page and look at Exhibit B. Historical sources also record severe, devastating atrocities. During his campaigns, his forces massacred over 1,200 Iyengar Brahmins in Melkote, a tragedy so deep that the town actually still does not celebrate Deepavali to this day. In Coorg, he ordered the deportation and captivity of roughly 40,000 Kodavas, boasting in a letter about raising them to the honor of Islam. He also forcefully clamped down on the Catholics of Mangalore and the Nairs of Malabar, and this brilliantly illustrates just how incredibly complex the historical data truly is. Which naturally leads us to Section 5, Unpacking Colonial Historiography. So how in the world do we reconcile those two completely opposite exhibits? Well, to answer any document-based question, we have to rely on historiography, the study of how history is actually written. It requires us to critically look at the biases, the sources, and the specific context of the historians who recorded the events themselves. Modern historians like Irfan Habib and Mohebul Hassan argue heavily about the origins of Tipu's tyrannical reputation. So the crucial point here is this. Much of the narrative surrounding Tipu Sultan's religious persecution derives directly from early British colonial authors, and modern scholars suggest these accounts might not be entirely reliable, and in some cases were heavily fabricated. Let's connect the dots on why they might embellish the truth. British source bias. Authors like Mark Wilkes and James Kirkpatrick weren't just neutral guys with notepads. They actually fought in the wars against Tipu Sultan. They were closely connected to the administrations of Lord Cornwallis and Lord Wellesley. After the British finally defeated Tipu during the siege of Seringapatam in 1799, the East India Company had a massive vested interest in portraying him as a savage, intolerant tyrant. Exaggerating narratives of his tyranny was a highly effective way to justify their military conquest and present themselves to the rest of the world as the righteous liberators of Mysore. So here we are at the end of our review. We've seen the incredible economic modernization, the revolutionary iron-cased rocketry, and the vast global diplomacy. We've examined the records of temple endowments right alongside the undeniable records of massacres and deportations. And we've questioned the bias of the colonial historians who wrote it all down. The data is on the table. Based on all of this, how will you write your final thesis on Tipu Sultan? I challenge you to synthesize this dual legacy for yourselves. Thanks for jumping into this explainer with me. Keep asking the hard questions, and I'll see you next time.